Hi, everyone. How is everybody tonight? Okay. In the fall of 1969, service was very much in my mind, but a special kind of service, the selective service. I received a letter from my local draft board saying I'd been reclassified 1A, and that I was to report for a pre-induction physical at the Federal Building in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, November 3rd. I took the bus, got up early that morning and took the bus. I got to the Federal Building and was directed to a dressing room where we were told to strip down completely naked. Then we were pointed towards a large, large room. At the front of it, we were arranged in ranks. The front of the room was a long table with 4 fully uniformed sergeants who gazed at us, and I looked back at them, and they looked at me, and I felt the first flush of humiliation. I felt as though I were in some kind of homoerotic hell. And then the doctors started coming down the lines. Well, first, actually, they told us to do a series of exercises. Flex our shoulders front and back, then lean over and touch our toes, and that kind of thing. Then the doctors came around, and they had little flashlights, and they told us to bend forward from our waist and to spread them, as they said. And then they looked inside us. And then another doctor came up to me, and he cupped my manhood in his hand and ordered me to cough. Now, some of the other guys started laughing at this point, but I didn't find any of these proceedings funny. And the thought that I had was, I kept thinking of all that archival footage I have seen of Jews lined up waiting to go into the gas chambers. And God forgive me, there's no comparison between what I went through that day and what they went through, but I couldn't erase the image from my mind. I thought of how they went to their naked slaughter, and I thought how all armies throughout the world use the same dehumanizing methods as we were being introduced to that day. I also couldn't help but think, what would happen if I passed the physical, and I had no reason to believe that I wouldn't pass the physical, if I actually ended up in Vietnam? And I thought of the VC, expert in camouflage, moving like liquid through the jungles. And the other options were not very appealing either. Prison, if I were to object on moral grounds, or go to Canada, which I'd resigned myself to do in case I did pass the physical. But this all seemed very bleak. At this point, they told us to put our underwear back on and get in line. And we started moving through the various stations that they had. At one point, a sergeant yelled out, "Anybody have a letter from a doctor here?" And I raised my hand. He said, "What kind of doctor?" I said, "A psychiatrist, Sergeant." He said, "Okay, go over to room 108. See the doctor there." I had started going to see a psychiatrist when I was in high school and continued throughout college. So I went over to room 108. There was a young doctor sitting behind a desk. He said, "You have a letter?" I said, "Yes." He said, "From a psychiatrist?" "Yes." He opened the letter and he began to read it. He asked me a series of questions. "Is this true? Was that true? Did this happen? Well, tell me exactly what happened." So I did. He paused for a moment. He looked at the letter from the psychiatrist. Then he said, "Okay, you have failed the physical on psychiatric grounds, but we need you to conclude the rest of the physical, but don't worry, it's a mere formality. I'm going to send this to your local draft board, and they will reclassify you 1Y. I said, 1Y, what is that, doctor? And he said, 1Y means you'll be called up only in the case of a national emergency. That is, if a foreign power or powers landed on the shores of America. So I thought it was rather remote that the Viet Cong would ever show up in the shores, outside of Santa Monica, so I figured I was safe. I put my clothes on and went outside, and I felt so free. And then one final disturbing thought ran through my mind. A friend of mine once said to me, every time we avoid the draft or we get a deferment, They just call someone else up. And I thought about that, and I said to myself, yeah. So I'm really glad I didn't go, but I've had to reconcile this all my life. Somebody I will never know went in my place. So thank you. That's my story.